really happened on the 4th of May, 1776. Come with me and let's find out. Manchi, ready to find the truth? Let's go! That's the date when Rhode Island declared independence from Great Britain after King George III stood in the way of true love. King George III and my great-great-grandfather, Gaspy Delaney, were best friends until Delaney told King George he wanted to marry Grace Lyons, England's most famous and most beautiful triangle player. Because King George also loved triangle music, so he forbade the marriage, and Delaney and Grace fled to America. They ended up in Rhode Island where they thought they'd be safe, but King George sent his henchmen after them. He couldn't bear the thought of Grace being free to marry Delaney, a lad who, he claimed, still owed him ninepence. Grace and Delaney were almost caught the first time when they were crossing some land and settlers grabbed them, saying they needed to pay the fee to cross their land, which was £1 or about £1 per neck. But when Delaney got word that King George was coming, he doubled the price, paying £2 a neck, and they managed to escape in the middle of a blizzard. They were almost caught again when they were out sailing in a little boat, and the only way to escape was to sail to the actual island of Rhode Island and paint the whole thing white and blue so it looked more like a Greek one than an American one. But it couldn't go on, so Delaney resolved to go back to England. When he told Grace, he made it sound like he was going to be all tough, but in fact he begged the king not to stand in the way of their happiness. King George, he said, had loads of people to play the triangle for him, because at any one time there's about 403 people standing around Buckingham Palace doing absolutely nothing. But Delaney only had Grace. But King George said he just didn't care. So Delaney called him a big vain idiot, and King George said that Delaney would never marry Grace while he owned the colonies. And that gave Delaney an idea. So on the boat back to America, he wrote King George a letter saying, in essence, "Thanks George, but we don't need you anymore. You're out." It really was that simple. But the crossing was rough with the ocean in an awful state, and Delaney started spewing something dreadful, what the Germans called Seekonk, and it was so bad that he was dead before they reached the shores of America. But a fellow passenger, a Baptist, carried Delaney's body, light as a feather after it had spewed up its soul and everything it had ever eaten, out to Grace. And Grace posted the letter to King George, and she married Delaney anyway. And that's how Rhode Island became the first of the 13 colonies to declare independence of Great Britain. But sure, that's nothing compared to what happened to my other great-great-grandfather. Make sure you follow or subscribe, or whatever they call it these days, so you don't miss that story. Ready, Manchi? Let's go!